Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this event sponsored by SPJ New England. My name is Olivia Young, and we're here talking to Emily Sweeney about her new book, Dropkick Murphy, A Legendary Life. It's an amazing book. I would definitely recommend anyone to go read it. Emily Sweeney is a staff reporter at the Boston Globe and the author of several nonfiction books, including Boston Organized Crime and Gangland Boston. She has made a number of appearances on TV and radio shows and is featured in multiple different TV and things like that. So like Bloody Boston, Stranger Than Fiction, and soon a new Netflix series called How to Be a Mob Boss. She's also the former president of SPJ New England. So it's a nice kind of coming back to the home turf. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So to start us off, like I said in the intro, your most recent book is called Dropkick Murphy, A Legendary Life. Can you give us a brief description on who Dropkick Murphy is and kind of how a professional wrestler wound up opening an addiction rehab facility? How did that happen?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story. So a lot of people have heard about the Dropkick Murphys, right? The band. I was always a big fan of, still am. And, I had always heard vaguely that they were named after a real guy, like a professional wrestler. And I didn't really have many details about him or anything like that. And when I moved out of Boston and moved out to the Metro West suburbs, I was in a restaurant in Acton, Massachusetts, and I heard like somebody talking about, hey, Dropkick Murphy's place. And I was like, what? You mean the band? They're like, no, the real person, the wrestler. He had a detox center right down the street from Crossroads. And from that point on, I wanted to learn as much as I could about this place. And it kind of set me off on a multi-year research endeavor, if you will. So, and I'm happy that the book is, it's finally done, and being able to tell this like really interesting story, to more people.
Yeah, and the book is super interesting. I really enjoyed reading it. I think you said you have some visuals of Dropkick
Yeah,
himself and his rehab facility. Could you show that to us really quick?
yeah, totally. All right, let me just share my screen here. Okay. All right. So here's a picture of Dropkick Murphy. Like I said, he was a professional wrestler. And it's really interesting because he wrestled professionally and then also put himself through medical school at the same time while he was wrestling. So he attended medical school classes during the day, wrestled at night, and he had quite a career. And his trademark move was the dropkick. And here's a photo of him doing his trademark move. As you can see, both feet usually would kick a guy, just like on the cover of the book. We use a great photo of like dropkick kicking a dude.
I am good having that never happen to me. Seeing these pictures, I'm like, I'm good. I'll just see a picture of it. I'm fine.
Right? No, seriously. And it was amazing because he would pull off this move like multiple times during any given match. Now, around 1940 is when he opened his rehab detox place in Acton, Massachusetts. It was called Bellows Farm, and he has a photo of like the house where it was, well, where he, where Dropkick and his family lived, and this is where the facility was located. It was actually like the big red barn that's right here. That was like played a major role. It was kind of like the social hub for all the clients who were going there to dry out from booze. And here's another photo I just want to show. It's really interesting because Bellows Farm wasn't just a detox center for alcoholics. It was also like a fitness center and training facility for elite athletes and also the general public. And this photo here was taken around 1949. There's like 3 professional boxes from Ireland, and that's Johnny Kelly right there wearing the sweater right in the front, the Boston Marathon legend, Johnny Kelly. And Yeah, so that's them, and that's the entrance to Bellows Farms. I know that it's a little small, but you can see at the top, it says Dropkick Murphy's Bellows Farm. So, yeah, that gives you just a little taste of, what the place looked like, what he looked like. And he led a very interesting life, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. In doing the research for the book, it's very interesting to see how he was like super gung-ho about wrestling. And then like kind of an event happened at a wrestling match where he was like, you know what, like I just want to stick to helping people like recover from alcoholism. I think it's really interesting how like that shift happened almost. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about his like rehabilitation facility? Because I'd never heard of like health sanitariums before this, because it wasn't just for like drying out from alcohol. It was also like where people could go and train and exercise and learn more about health, because obviously he was also a doctor. So could you kind of tell us how like both of those kind of coincided at his place?
Yeah, so basically the Bellows Farm was an 80-acre, actually was at one point an actual working farm. When he bought the land and turned it into, rehab facility and fitness center, he built a state of the art gymnasium there that had a boxing and wrestling ring. So that was where boxers and would spar, and guys like Tommy Collins, Tony DeMarco would come out there and train before some of their big fights at Boston Garden. And meanwhile, like the center, it was really interesting too, is because Dropkick opened, his facility up to the general public too. And so, he offered personal training services, kind of like supervised weightlifting. And this is in the 1940s, which is like, he's kind of in a way, like I feel like ahead of his time, with his focus on like physical fitness and getting people, to be, live healthier lifestyles.
Mhm.
So, the detox center part of it, I mean, that was his, probably, the major part of his business, you know what I mean? He'd have clients come, and stay there temporarily, so they'd have like dorm style kind of like housing, and the guys would dry out from booze. And not just dry out, there was also advertised for people who were just, exhausted, maybe they're battling other types of addictions, but alcoholism was the big thing. And guys would come out, dry out. One thing that happened, quite a bit was guys would try to sneak in alcohol, and like hide bottles of booze around the property before they checked in, you know what I mean? And then they'd like try to go find them. And Dropkick would have, either like his kids, or, I heard from his nephew also that he would like task them with kind of like searching the property, for any like, contraband that clients may have tried to like, smuggle in, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was an interesting juxtaposition of, you know what I mean? Again, you had the physical fitness, and then you also had, alcoholics drying out, there.
Yeah. And interesting that it's like a whole family affair. His whole family was helping him with it. That's really cool.
Yeah, like his older sons, obviously were more involved. He also had like, younger kids, and obviously they were busy with school and whatnot. But in interviews I had read with Dropkick Murphy, he said that the clients, the patients always treated his kids well and with respect. And Dropkick's children, the ones I interviewed, said the same thing, so yeah, it's kind of interesting raising your family in that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
Pretty unique.
Yeah. So you mentioned like being able to actually interview like some of his children and stuff like that. How did you tackle the research portion of this book? Was it different from any of the other books that you've written? I know you have in the back of your book, you have a lot of like notes and things like that. So was it any different? How did you do that?
Yeah, so the research took, literally years. Dropkick's Bellows Farm operated from the 1940s up until 1971, so that's like, 1971 closing then, that's like, half a century ago. So
Yeah.
a lot of, people who, there wasn't really records of people who stayed there. Like, there was a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings held there. And, I was lucky to find a patient who's about 90 years old now, Bobby Byrne. He operates a pub on the Cape, and he kept really good track, and just had records and stuff from his stay at Dropkick Murphy's.
Wow.
And I was so lucky to find him, and he was able, and was willing to share his memories of the place and his experience there. That was huge. I also found some folks who worked there at Bellows Farm, police officers who would also kind of work there part-time, helping out. They gave me, their memories of the place, as well as Dropkick Murphy's children. They shared a lot of photos. And I also contacted wrestlers, just for instance, for the first chapter, the ring announcer for one of the wrestling matches, I got in touch with his son, because Whitey Confer had passed away many years ago, but his son, shared audio recordings of his dad, and it gave me, an idea of what he sounded like, at the time, announcing things. And I also spoke to the children of professional wrestlers too, and yeah, so it was a lot of research, but it was definitely well worth it, because I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I think it provides a good overview of what happened at Bellows Farm, and what led up to it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to talking about the wrestler and talking to the announcer's son, one detail that really stood out to me, kind of talking about the whole wrestling side of it, was that your writing in the beginning of the book, describing the boxing matches or wrestling matches and the atmosphere of that day was very immersive. Like, there were a lot of details, and it really felt like reading it, you were almost kind of there, which was really awesome to kind of set the whole scene for the book. Why was properly establishing those scenes important to you, kind of just right off the bat?
Well, my goal, I would have loved to set the scene like that for every scene in the book. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm not a novel writer, you know what I mean? Nonfiction, you have to dig up every single piece of information, every quote. So for the first chapter, I really want just to really show what a wrestling match was like back then. And how I did that was everything from, describing what the moonlight looked that night, from looking at moon charts and where the, the moon mentioning it being close to a full moon in the Boston Globe way back when, to just the architecture of the building where the matches were held, to reading, I've read countless articles and magazine articles describing matches at the time, what the crowds were like, what the typical size crowd was at mechanics, at the mechanics building. And yeah, it just took a lot of work, but I just,
absolutely.
yeah, in the end notes, everything is really documented, because I want to show every single detail.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, what came from historical research.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was my goal. And again, I would have loved to have done that throughout the whole entire book, but just, it being the lack of records and the lack of, a lot of people had, were many years since, passed away. It was kind of impossible to do, but I was really happy that I was able to do it with the first chapter to give people an idea of what wrestling matches were like in the 1930s. And it's kind of crazy. Well, maybe not to some people, but I was amazed at how similar professional wrestling was back then, compared to today.
Yeah.
There was a lot of theatrics, obviously amazing athleticism, and acrobat style moves in the ring back then, obviously Dropkick with his trademark move. But it was just interesting, just, learning, how professional wrestling, how, yeah, a lot of it is still like that today.
Yeah. And the characters, you describe people having to spray perfume on the mats before they go out, or like doing moves that they knew would rile up the crowd. You still see a lot of that today, which I feel like it's interesting to see. It kind of like a lot has changed and a lot has stayed the same as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and think about it, it's like almost like 100 years later, and like some of
Yeah.
the like same stereotypes and stuff are
Mhm.
used, have been continually used in professional wrestling, and some of the storylines and things. But
Mhm.
I was really happy that first of all, Ken Casey, frontman for the Dropkick Murphys, he was really supportive throughout me writing the book. When I just from the moment I let him know, I'm like, hey, I know where the real Dropkick Murphys, like his farm was. Because when I started doing the research into it, there were other books that had mentioned Dropkick Murphy's farm, and sometimes they mentioned it like it being in the wrong town or had the location wrong.
Mhm.
And Ken Casey was, totally interested in like hearing, and learning more about it too. And he wrote the foreword to the book.
Right.
And I was also happy Linda McMahon, of WWE fame, she was, spent time like talking to me just about, obviously her family has like deep roots in wrestling, her husband Vince. And, she gave me some of the, background about just, how professional wrestling, has evolved, and, Dropkick Murphy, kind of being ahead of his time in a way. So I was really happy that she was willing to, be interviewed for the book, and she's in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, the research was awesome. And I was gonna ask, what was it like having Ken Casey write the forward for it? I bet that was kind of a nice, like, he can kind of learn where his name came from, you know what I mean? Or his band's names came from.
Yeah. So it's amazing because like Ken knew like when the Dropkick Murphys first started playing shows, Ken, and this is, mentioned in the forward of the book, he said that, there would be like older guys would see like Dropkick Murphy shirts and be like, yo, I stayed there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he knew it was like a dry out place, a detox center of sorts. But again, like the, details were vague. So, I was happy to like, unearth as many details as I could, and honored that like Ken, I felt even, obviously the Dropkick Murphys, if you ever look at their tour schedule, it's insane. These guys like, you know what I mean? They play all the time, they're recording albums, they're recording videos, they're so busy. But I was so happy that, he was willing to take the time to write the forward for the book. It meant a lot.
Yeah. Um, so why was it so important to you to kind of show the story and true identity of who Dropkick Murphy was?
Yeah, because I thought that like at least I wasn't aware of, Dropkick Murphy, being an actual doctor, in addition to being a professional wrestler. I thought that was really fascinating. And the fact that he, really devoted his life to helping people who were battling addiction and alcoholism, I thought that was really noble, and his focus on physical fitness and helping people lead healthier lifestyles. I thought, was just really cool. You know what I mean? A true role model. And it's really, and he led a very interesting life. You know what I mean? Like you don't hear
He
about
really
too
did,
many
yeah.
professional wrestlers putting themselves, in graduating from medical school. And also, establishing a place that's so unique like Bellows Farm. And he kind of was a unique guy right from the very beginning, because when I interviewed one of Dropkick's children, one of the first things they told me, they were like, yeah, he was like the leader of the marching band in high school. And I was kind of like, what? Like, I
Yeah.
was kind of surprised at first, you know what I mean? And it turns
Mhm.
out, he did play some football in high school, but his big thing was, he at least the reason why he said he quit football, and became the leader of the marching band because he wasn't getting much playing time. But he was like such a good like band leader, apparently, like throwing the batons up into the air and doing all these tricks that he got written about in, not only the local papers, but also the Globe. Even did like a couple, cartoons of him. And this is like, the leader of the band, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
showing the sports pages.
It's not the main thing at the football game.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I just thought that was so so cool, you know what I mean? Like, definitely he went, he kind of like went to his own beat, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool too. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Went to his own beat in more ways than one.
yeah.
Seems like. So shifting to a couple of your other books, your last two nonfiction books were about organized crime in Boston. Them being, of course, Boston Organized Crime and Gangland Boston, which was described as a guided tour of Boston's underworld, revealing the places where deals are made, people were killed, and bodies were buried, which sounds like a pretty awesome intro to the book, if I might say. So you kind of touched on this briefly, but what made you want to pivot away from writing about organized crime for a little bit to writing about Dropkick Murphy and his life?
Well, as soon as I learned about the location of Dropkick Murphy's farm, and the more I learned about it, but it took a long time to pull together all the details and do the research. But the more I got, the more I was just like, you know what, this is like this. I felt like it should be a movie, honestly.
Yeah.
I think it would be much better because whoever would do the screenplay, like I started writing a screenplay about it, would have a little bit more creative control and be able to, tell the story. Again, I was, my hands are tied because I, told the story exactly, nonfiction, all researched, you know what I mean? Like nothing's made
Yeah.
up at all. But I think it would be an excellent movie. And so that kind of drove me. I was like, you know what, I really need to finish this book and just get the story out there. And again, yeah, so organized crime, those were my two previous books. I have another book coming out later this year, which will also be back to organized crime.
Nice.
And, and yeah. So I mean, obviously the characters like were much different, than writing about, organized crime figures. But, on the same token, we're all people at the end of the day, you know what I mean? People have their good sides, bad sides. And this was it was a nicer book. I mean, I guess more fun to write because, with organized crime, there's just so many victims of organized crime, so many murders, you know what I mean? And like, there's just a lot of, bad stuff.
Yeah.
And
Pretty
this,
good
it was,
stuff.
it was kind of refreshing and really like, I felt good, just writing about something different for a bit. And also it just being such an uplifting story, I felt like.
Right. Yeah. Really quickly to all of our viewers, if you guys have any questions for Emily, you can write that in the chat and we can discuss them at the end if you guys want to contribute anything like that. Probably should have said that in the beginning, but sometimes I need to interrupt myself. So talking about your organized crime work, what was it like you mentioned it being a little bit heavier. What was it like exploring that world? And were there any like interesting people you got to interview along the way?
So my first two books about organized crime were mostly really focused on the history of organized crime in the greater Boston area. So, going back to the days of Prohibition and even before that, like, to like kind of like how around, probably 1890s. It's probably the earliest I go back to is, when the Italian mafia began really emerging as a force in the North End. So, it's a lot of historical research that I did. And, I did interview like over for those books, sources in law enforcement, actually both sides of the law. But a lot of it was like historical. The book that I'm working on now, the title is Four on the Floor. That's gonna look at the 1995 Charlestown 99 restaurant and pub shooting, and also look at the mob wars, so to speak, of the 1990s in Boston. And so I'm interviewing a lot of people. I'm still interviewing people, and it's a lot different than doing historical research. You know what I mean? Because I'm interviewing, people who are alive and well, and telling me their memories of certain things. And the central figure in that book is Bobby Louisi, and he, organized crime figure, and also his father and half brother, were victims of the 99 shooting. So, it, tells a lot from his perspective, of what was going on, before and after the 99 shootings, and also the, like I said, the so-called mob wars, of that era.
Yeah.
So, but it's a lot different from doing historical research, you know what I mean? Because this is like trying to, talk to real people, and going through a lot of court records, thousands and thousands of pages of court transcripts.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit different.
Yeah. Could you, like, I know this might be a really hard question. Could you pick which one you like more? Do you like doing more historical research? Do you like talking to people like that are more recent? Is there one that you prefer? Anything like that?
Yeah, well, it's funny. So, I mean, I work for the Globe, you know what I mean? I'm a staff reporter. So, like, every day I'm talking to people. I love talking to people.
Right.
My editors at the Globe are, like, very often they will send me, I'm one of the, reporters who they send out into the field to, like, knock on doors. And yeah, like, I really enjoy, and I feel like I have a, I've had, like, good luck, I guess, like, connecting with people and getting people to, be willing to share their stories, you know what I mean? And so yeah, I thoroughly enjoy that. And I do that every day for the Globe. And so writing books has been kind of like more of like a labor of love, that I do something, that I do, after work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I'm a huge history buff, and, people, you can probably tell by any of the books that I've written so far.
Right.
So I love history. I love, looking up old photos and going to libraries, going through, like, looking at microfiche, you know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
just like
Totally.
a total history geek and research geek. So, yeah, so I like both. It's really hard to pick.
Yeah. Helps to like talking to people and helps to like doing research when you want to be a journalist. Both of those
Yeah.
two things are pretty important to have. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So of course, this Zoom is sponsored by the New England chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, a chapter that you used to be the president of. What was your experience like working with SPJ, and how do you think it kind of influenced your journalism career? Do you think it like opened up specific opportunities, anything like that?
yeah, so I mean, SPJ was one of the first organizations I joined, as a when I was first starting my journalism career. And it was great. It was the first organization where I got to, like, I got to meet other journalists, and meet folks who, were kind of like mentors in a way, because, they'd been working in the industry for years. So that was, like, so important, and it meant so much to me, and also all the activities that SPJ has put on over the years, everything from conferences to panels to, has been so helpful. And it really showed me the importance to, being president of SPJ, showed me the importance of being involved, you know what I mean? Outside of work, and I've continued to do that too. I still, I volunteer with other boards, on the New England First Amendment Coalition Board, the New England Society of News Editors, even though I'm not an editor, I'm a reporter, but yeah, so,
Yeah.
it really, yeah. So SPJ was like, I love what the organization does. And yeah, and one of the things that, when during my tenure, I guess, like, as president, I was like gung-ho on, like, getting a scholarship fund launched. And so, when I was president, we threw, like, a whole bunch of, like, really crazy Halloween parties and raised, like,
Nice.
money for the scholarship. So that's so, I'm so happy that that got off the ground. And yeah, I think SPJ is an amazing organization. So
Yeah.
it's doing great work.
It looks like the scholarship fund is now at $16,000, which is awesome. Sure warms your heart to hear. Yeah, you being kind of a history buff, in kind of doing research for this and talking to some other SPJ New England members, it was brought to my attention that you kind of like learned a lot about the history of SPJ. Like, could you give us kind of a brief like run through something that you found really interesting from it?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to think. Like, I just remember I had like a gigantic box of like archives and stuff that I feel like I I passed along. So I forget off the top of my head. I feel like Adam Sennett's done an amazing job unearthing even more, so I really can't take credit. I always tried to like, let people know how old the chapter was, and just let them know that it had been around a long time. But Adam's found some amazing like artifacts from like SPJ New England's history. And yeah, so yeah, sorry
Awesome.
if I
No, that was great. We like there's definitely a lot of history there. There's some really good stuff.
so yeah.
Um, so jumping back to Dropkick Murphy for a second, to start closing us out. One of the quotes that really stuck with me in your book is towards the end when you're discussing Bellows Farms, the impact it has. You said, Murphy's sports-centric approach to health and fitness drew many followers, and perhaps there are lessons that can be learned from him today. Um, what are some lessons that you took away from his life, and what are some that you kind of hope that readers take away from his as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess there's so many. I mean, one being, don't be afraid to like pursue your dream. I know it might sound cheesy, but the fact that he, went ahead, there were other sanitariums at the time, and there are other, obviously, like, boxing training facilities. But the fact that, he pursued and like carved out and like made into a successful, enterprise, Bellows Farm, I think is pretty amazing. And the fact that like he had a successful career wrestling all over the country. The fact that he graduated from medical school successfully. I think all of those things are, you know, amazing accomplishments. And, my huge takeaway was his focus on health and also helping people lead healthier lifestyles, whether, be drying out from alcohol to getting in shape. I just thought was like really, really cool. And something I need to do every day. Like I try to work out every day, and you know what? I could work out more. I should.
Yeah. Hey, you're working towards it, and that's what's important. Okay, so quickly, do you have, before we get into some submitted questions, it's gonna be very broad, but do you just have any advice for the journalists that are watching? Like anything, kind of seeing what helped you get to your position, something that you wish that you would know when you were kind of earlier in your journalism career, or anything that's helpful now? What are some thoughts for other journalists?
I think like getting out and like networking as much as you can and trying to find mentors. And actually having mentors at every stage of your journalism career is really important. And having more than one, preferably too. I think it's just great, being friends or if like befriending, journalists and other organizations as well. It's gives you a perspective. That you might not get just from working in your own newsroom. But yeah, I think that's huge. I think networking, that's probably
Yeah,
the number one piece of advice I would give to any journalist for sure.
totally. Um, so now to some submitted questions. You mentioned this when talking about the characters in your book. How did the characters in Dropkick Murphys compare to some of the ones that you came across in your books about organized crime?
um I mean, I would say that, obviously I mean, organized crime figures, some of them, also, it's kind of, it's a difficult research topic as well. I mean, that's one thing in common, because
Mhm.
obviously organized crime,
Don't want to reveal themselves, so their sources.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's not
Yeah,
like, people try to stay on the DL, or they were
yeah.
trying to,
No one's like, I do this, I rob this
yeah,
bank.
yeah,
No.
here's the books, like, you know what I mean? For my illegal operation.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, that's one thing in common is like it is tough research topics. Organized crime figures, I mean, I guess run the gamut. Professional wrestlers, on the other hand, I mean, they did have something in common. They worked really hard. Professional wrestlers back then, they had to like do a lot of traveling. Obviously, they had to work out. They were also susceptible to injury because, I mean, if you look at some of the moves that they were doing, and even though like even matches that were choreographed, you know what I mean, things can go wrong, you know what I mean? And they had to live a healthy lifestyle. They had to eat a ton to, to stay bulky and
Yeah.
muscular. So yeah, it's a completely different lifestyle, I guess, from the lifestyle of a criminal
Right.
professional wrestler, you know. But
Yeah. One's a little more healthier,
yeah,
probably better for
yeah.
you. Yeah.
So so yeah, so I guess they were vastly different, I guess, if you had to paint it with a
Yeah.
broad.
Yeah. Um, so another submitted question. So you play on a hockey team and you play with Eddie McKenzie's daughter. Eddie Mack was, of course, a former drug dealer for Whitney Bulger. Have you interviewed him for either your past books or your book you're working on now?
I haven't, and I to be honest, for the first time I was like, you know what? I got to put a hold on hockey because with the release of the Dropkick Murphy book and me finishing the other book, I was like, I have literally no time. I'm like
Right.
working nonstop.
Mhm.
So I haven't been skating the past few months, but I have skated in the past over the years. It's been actually quite a few years now that I skated with his daughter. But I do, and I haven't interviewed him or met him, but I do have his book and I've read it. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, right now my focus is more on I guess like goings on in the North End and everything for the book I'm working on now. And yeah, so I mean I probably wouldn't be interviewing him for that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Another submitted question. Did Dropkick Murphy's family have any issues with you writing about him? And did they have any issues with a band being named after him? Was there anything that they kind of wanted to keep more sacred and private, or did they kind of welcome this talking about his life?
well, what I was told when I spoke to a couple of his children, they had said that they, at first they were like, "Wow, like this band is like, taking off, and it's like our dad's name." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I believe one of them reached out to the band, and they got in touch, and so the Murphy children and the band have been in touch. You know what I mean? And the band like has always said like, "Oh my God, whenever you guys want to come to a show, please do." And the Murphy family, I think is, are probably safe to say, fans of the band. So that they have a good relationship as far as I can tell. And the when I embarking on the book, I interviewed Dropkick's children like, extensively, and especially his, oldest two sons, well, actually his oldest son has passed away, but his other sons, and also his daughter Amy, and so it was interesting because I remember like looking back at the notes that I have, and it's all like a lot of it's from like a kid perspective, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
because they were kids, and
Mhm.
so like they just, remembered like the time Rocky Marciano showed up and like boxers and like, looking for like the contraband liquor bottles.
Yeah.
It was definitely like limited to a kid's perspective. And so, it was through all the other avenues of research that I was able to like cobble together like, his, Dropkick's everything from his academic career up, through professional wrestling, and find out even more about Bellows Farm, thanks to like, especially Bobby Byrne, one of his former patients. So, I hope for, Dropkick's family, they were very supportive of me writing the book, but I hope it's like, eye-opening, I guess, for them, you know what I mean? Because I did find like a ton of information, about their father. So I hope, all I can do is I hope they enjoy, learning more about him. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that is all the questions I have. Emily Sweeney is an author of several nonfiction books, including Dropkick Murphy, A Legendary Life. She's also a staff writer at the Boston Globe and a former president of SPJ New England. And we really thank you for speaking with us today about your recent book. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
hey, yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for everybody who tuned in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks to everyone for listening. And thank you, Emily. And everyone have a good rest of your day.